For the record, tell me your name.
Marc Levy.
And Mark is with a C?
Yes.
And Levy, L-E-V-Y.
Yes.
And what branch of the service were you in?
Army.
And were you drafted or did you enlist?
Enlisted.
Enlisted, and what were the dates you had in country for you?
Dates in country were 26 November 69 to 1 November 70.
And what rank did you hold while you were in Vietnam?
Got all the way up to E4.
Okay.
Am I looking into the lens here or looking at you? It doesn't matter.
Either way, it doesn't matter. And how old were you when you went to Vietnam?
Got in country, I was 19.
And where were you stationed?
Basically came in to a replacement center. Long story short, our forward rear base camp was Quan Loy, and the battalion, 1st of the 7th, worked out at Quan Loy, and we patrolled in free fire zones in An Lac, Lac Minh, and Song Bay, Tay Ninh, and then in May we crossed over into Cambodia.
Okay. That was pretty hot in Cambodia.
Cambodia was hot. Although, what I always tell people is the year, the unit, and the area of operations determine the intensity of the person's combat experience. So,
What do you mean?
well, 70 was kind of a transitional year. So, Tet was a year and past, the NVA, whomever, kind of regrouping. 1st of the 7th, my company dealt the 1st of the 7th CAV. There were periods where nothing happened. And then there would be small firefights, an ambush, rocket and mortar attacks on some of the fire bases. But there were no big battles. There just weren't. No mass casualties. It's when we crossed into Cambodia, we flew in. 46 days, every day, firefight, sometimes twice a day. And we got overrun. That was rough.
And that was NVA you were fighting?
Well, yeah, we were in the backyard.
I mean, they were regular troops, it wasn't like VC?
No. No. That was rough.
And what were your responsibilities?
I was the medic in 3rd Platoon for Delta Company, 1st of the 7th. And I was responsible for taking care of guys' cuts and scratches, aches and pains, cuts from the bamboo, fevers, colds.
What kind of training did you have to do that?
You got 9 weeks of training as a medic at Fort Sam Houston. And the emphasis was kind of on first aid and, of all things, hospitals. How to make a bed, how to take a temperature, how to give an IV, the proper way to wrap a bandage. A lot of it was basically geared towards World War II, and very little of it was actually geared towards guerrilla warfare and the kind of medicine or first aid that you need to implement under those kinds of conditions. So when I finally got to Vietnam, it was OJT. A couple of medics took me over and said, here's the creams that you're going to use for fungal infections. Here's all the pills you're going to use. Here's a pack, and you put this under your regular pack, and grab some of this and this and this, and here's how to stop a second chest wound, and here's how to do this and that. And so I just learned quick.
When you were, what size of a unit were you going out? So you were, when you were in Cambodia, you guys were doing patrols, you get a little base going. What was the situation like?
We were regular grunts, as separate from elite, well-trained units. Lurks, Rangers, Recondos, Special Forces, MAXOC. We're just regular grunts. So we worked, say we'd spend 3 weeks to 3 months in the jungle on patrols. Steve remembers, or my lieutenant remembers the time we spent 116 days straight in the jungle. That's a long time. And then we get resupplied every 3 days. Everyone was carrying, I'd estimate 60, 65 pounds, maybe more. That's a conservative, but I think an accurate estimate. So for, let's say, a month, for argument's sake, patrol, company, 100, 120 guys, making a lot of noise, frankly. Free fire zone, anything moved, that was fair game. The pattern was basically, we walked into them, they walked into us, we walked into each other, we walked into their ambush, they walked into ours, or they rocketed and mortared us, so we called in artillery on them. At the same time, the company would march for example, 3 or 4 miles, set down in what's called an NDP, night defensive perimeter, and send out 2 or 3 patrols, platoon size, cloverleaf. So if you weren't walking with 120 guys, you were walking with 15 to 20 guys. That's what we did.
And when you would go out with the 15 or 20 guys, you were the sole medic?
I was the medic in the platoon. So the platoon would consist of the point man, a slack man right behind him, a couple of more rifle guys, the machine gun team, machine gunner, ammo bearer, maybe 2 or 3 more riflemen, then what was called the CP, the 2 officers, radio man, medic, 1 or 2 more riflemen, and the last guy in line, drag.
And what kind of action did you see when you were in Cambodia?
In Cambodia, it was basically small firefights and ambushes. These guys were brazen. I mean, they would just jump out. One guy just jumped out of the jungle behind some trees, just jumped out because we were walking down a tank trail, and just jumped out and popped off a couple of rounds and ran. Hit a friend of mine who I met about 2 years ago. He thought he was going to die because he got hit, and he thought the guy was going to come running and finish him off. For the most part, it was
Did the point man, was your friend the point man, or was
no,
he
he was
back in?
a lieutenant. Some lieutenant wanted him to go out and flank with a machine gun. And it was a dumb call. So he got hit. But we were making contact. We're in the backyard of these guys, and we're making contact at least once a day, and sometimes twice and 3 times a day. And we weren't, so we're not talking pitched battles, but it was just like, when's it going to happen? So you're on guard all the time. And, firefight, 20 minutes, half hour, and then it's over. And then, this pattern, big relief, and then that gives way to anticipation. And basically you want it to happen again and get it out of the way. It's kind of the way I processed it. And we were on 3 fire bases in Cambodia, and because it was rainy season, they either got flooded out or they were just sopping wet, muddy, cold. And one of them got overran, and I have the reports, we took 26 wounded and 5 KIA, which means there were probably 10 KIA and 40 wounded. The reports are never accurate, and it was scary. It was. I mean, they were inside, and I was with guys over here, and the bad guys came in over here, and they were inside, and they were throwing saucer charges inside the artillery pits. They were running around shooting people. I got a friend of mine sent me an eyewitness account because he was right there where it happened. And it only lasted 2.5 hours, but it gunships came in and they were laying down their stuff, and then the flare ships came in and they were throwing out basketball ones. And a friend of mine said, "You remember when the jets came in?" I don't remember when the jets came in, but he said the jets came in and they laid down cannon fire. We were getting heavy arty from Boda, 155 and 175, and then it was just astonishing. The 155 millimeter cannons were firing direct fire into the wood line, and at one point they sent up what's called a red flare. They yelled out "fire in the hole," everybody dropped, and they started shooting flechette rounds. They're illegal.
What is that?
It's a canister, and instead of filled with a shell, instead of a shell, it's packed with all these little darts, like little brads with flutes. So it's called, once the shell explodes, you've got like this inorganic beehive of little nails that swarm through the jungle in a cloud. Anything in the way gets nailed to whatever tree is nearby.
Did you see the aftermath of that?
No, I didn't go out on the patrol. Another platoon went out and they dragged guys back in. And the next day there were about like a dozen sappers. They were all killed. And then one guy was, he's dead. He's got a Chi-Com in his hand, and they all had RPGs on them, Chi-Coms strapped to them. They were like little kids. They were porcelain faced, very light skinned, and a couple of us, one guy picks up the arms and legs and throw them into the bomb crater, and then salt them with lime, burn them. I remember all the wounded laid out in rows waiting for the choppers to come. It was
They're wounded.
ours.
You're wounded.
They didn't have any wounded.
They took them with them? They just...
That's a very good point. They took, always, whenever we engaged, there'd be a firefight or whatever, and they would drag their people away. I didn't learn about it later, too much later. The NVA would put little, they carried hook sticks and they put loops of bamboo or rope around their legs, and if somebody was wounded, they could grab them and haul them off. We heard them do that once. We really didn't know what was going on. When we reconned that next day, because of the 155 direct fire and the flechette rounds, they lost another, I don't know, 6 or 7 guys. So we just dragged in these dead bodies, or this other platoon did. And that was scary. They were, and our captain was brilliant. He went over the berm to hunt those guys down. I was shaking so hard, and I was with these 2 RTOs with the radios, and they had the antennas up, and their antennas were going back and forth so fast, they were a blur. We were just shaking involuntarily. And some guy over here, he's in a bunker and he gets shot. He's in a bunker and he gets shot. I had to run out and bandage him up, and I just stand still. And it was like, I had a hard time. It was a flesh.
Where was he hit? Where was he hit?
In the arm, in the hand.
So what did you have to do?
I just had to slap a bandage on to stop the bleeding. So he was lucky, we were both lucky. It was a flesh wound. So it was probably a straight round. Caught him. But just remember, the 3 of us, a medic and the 2 RTOs, were standing in this little, it wasn't even a foxhole, thinking they're going to come right over the top. We were just petrified. And then people got in line, shooting, flares, and then the ultimate American bravado. The next day, Stars and Stripes comes in, they interview people, and a week later it shows up in the paper that we repulsed this attack, and we were great defense. It was all bullshit. They caught us. They had a map of the place. They had everything lined out. They nailed us.
They were just waiting for you.
Yeah, they knew. This tree line on this side was too close to the perimeter. That's where they came in. They had all the bunkers. They had everything was coordinated. It was well done, well executed. They were picked up on radar. And whatever the radar guys did, because I got the reports, they picked them up. They had the coordinates, they had the time and this and that, but they didn't do anything. And a lot of good guys got wasted, got killed or wounded for.
This was mortars, mostly?
They came in and, because it was a sapper attack, they got the...
What's a sapper?
Sapper is a specially trained, it's kind of like their version of a special forces guy. And they're really, really good at, they're trained getting through the concertina wire. And taking rubber bands and putting them on the trip flare so they won't set them off. They're really good at getting past obstacles that we put in the way to catch them. So once they got in, it's just incredible what they could get through. It was suicide. They would, once they got in, they killed as many Americans and wounded as many Americans as they could, and took charges that were in these like little bags that had a short fuse. They would throw them into an artillery pit where guys were sleeping, and they would kill all those guys, turn them and chop them, and then just spray as many Americans as they could. So they were on the ground. They weren't really calling in rounds. They weren't calling in mortars. They were just doing as much damage as they could.
Typically at night?
This typically at night. This happened at night. This happened around 2:30.
2:30 at night, guys are on patrol. You're sleeping at the time, or?
Oh, everyone was on. Supposedly there were guys on guard on the perimeter.
Right.
But this one platoon wasn't so. They weren't so great, so they didn't butterfly the trips, which means to make them extra sensitive, so these guys were able to get through. We didn't do any night patrols, so we were just waiting. It was just another night. But I think, they took into consideration the moon and whatever other, factors would contribute to the efficacy of what they wanted to do. And nailed us.
So this is one particular incident in Cambodia that you're referring to?
Other incidents were basically...
So were you sleeping at the time?
Was I sleeping at the time? Absolutely.
So you're conked out?
Yeah.
And then you hear some...
yeah.
You hear explosion?
Explosion and gunfire. Yeah. But there are other times, I remember another, a small LZ, landing zone. It took incoming. I was sleeping, and some guy came running past. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "We're getting hit." And he ran. So I ran for a bunker, and the rounds just went right over us. I mean, right over the bunker, I hit the next bunker. Really lucky.
And at what point are your services called for?
Guys would come to me after patrols and say, "Hey, Doc, I got cuts and scratches." Or, "Hey, Doc."
I imagine infection would be a real
Infection, small infections, ticks, splinters, headaches, earaches, fevers, chills, coughs, colds. So that was...
so you were hauling basic first aid stuff?
First aid stuff, and then I had every medic carried a Claymore bag as well as a medical supply bag.
You had claymores as well?
Well, it was a Claymore bag.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, medics didn't have to carry ammunition. Carried medical supplies, but I had a Claymore bag, and that's where I put all the bandages and stuff.
Okay.
So when people got wounded, when things were going fine, the guys would come over and call you Doc. Mortar attack, firefight. Linguistically, it's very interesting. They don't call Doc. They scream. Every medic's called Doc, but when somebody gets hit, it's just a reflex. They scream, medic. And they just scream it out. And just as instinctively, you run to where that is.
And that could be dangerous.
It can be dangerous. Everybody...
Did a lot of medics get hit during the war?
I don't have the figures, but I'm sure they did. My understanding is that the Army policy was to rotate medics every 6 months. You were a medic for 6 months, and then you got rotated out to another job.
To a base or something.
Because you got too close to your guys, or it was too stressful, and it went crazy. You went crazy. So, long story short, I did an extra 2 months and then I got out. So I was a medic for 8 months.
For 8 months. So you're talking about headaches and ticks and scratches and stuff like that, but I'm sure you saw more grievous kinds of injuries.
Well, I was lucky, and when I spoke to my head medic about 4 years ago at least, about 5 minutes into our conversation, he said, you know, we were really lucky. We saw our share and some really close calls. We never had mass casualties like the Marines or some larger battles that the Army fought. A lot of guys got wounded, a lot of flesh wounds, a couple of bad, ugly, barbarous, barbaric stuff. But for the most part, it was, we were just lucky.
I worked with it. I have a picture there of a guy who was a doctor at Quezon, and he just saw, he saw everything that you could imagine. Quadruple amputees, the works.
I was lucky. The worst I saw was the first guy that got patched up, that I patched up, friendly fire. So the CAV used what's called a hunter-killer team. A little loach comes in and scouts out the area, and then calls in the killer, which is the Cobra gunship, and he would come in with rockets and miniguns and 40 mite grenades. And they came in, the little loach came in, and we waved, and there was a machine gun team up on a hill, and a loach opened up on the machine gun team. And from like 30 yards, if that, 40 yards, he's right above, it's like a big bumblebee. And he hit him with a 60. Here, and here, and here, and here.
60.
Yeah, and then he walks the rounds down, because he sees all these people waving. He was trigger happy, it was understandable. But we'd thrown smoke to mark our position. So, and then the rounds came right, you could see them, they're walking them down the hill. They missed me, they missed Steve, they missed all of us by like 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever. And Steve said, get up there, Doc. Because we were like, what's going on? This is crazy. And he ran up, and this guy was, and by that time they got the message. He just shot our own guys. Steve got on the horn and said, that's us, you f-, and he cursed him, whatever. And the guy was, his leg was just blown open. I'm looking at his bones. I'm looking at his muscle. I'm looking at ligaments and whatever, anatomy and this thing was a geyser. And I just... Did
you feel up to the task? Or did you not think about it, just instinctively?
You're not thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking. The really cool thing is that I straddled the guy. I just sat on him. And it was kind of dangerous. And then Blue Max comes in, the gunship, and he starts laying down rockets and miniguns right over us. So it was like Apocalypse Now. And I'm on top of the guy, boom. And the red smoke finally got popped. So you got smoke, you got rockets, you got miniguns, and it was wild. And I'm patching this guy up. He's writhing in pain, and I don't know where it comes from. This is the good part of the war story, because it's not heroics. From somewhere, bearing in mind I'm Jewish, I said, and this is in the film, I said, John, do you believe in Jesus? And he's screaming. I said, John, come on, we're going to pray, John. We're going to pray to fucking Jesus. And he's like, what? I said, John, come on, pray. Pray with me, John. And he's going, Doc, give me a fucking cigarette. Give me a fucking, his hands are shaking. And I turned to this other guy, the squad leader, I said, Pete, give him a cigarette. And so John's got a cigarette, but he's shaking like this. I said, Pete, light the fucking cigarette. And then he starts smoking the cigarette, and I jab him with morphine. And then I don't remember how we got him down to a bomb crater. and then we medevaced him, and I fucked up. So we're at the lip of this bomb crater. The medevac throws down a litter, put him in.
So they couldn't land.
No, too thick. It was safe, but it was too thick. And winched him up. His arm's all fucked up. The medevac, the litter was good because it strapped him in tight and it cut off the blood flow enough that it was acting like a giant
Did you put tourniquet? Yeah, did you put tourniquets on the arm and leg?
No, I just wrapped it up tight. Wrapped it up tight. And not thinking, just acting, just acting, just responding. And then as the helicopter's wenching him up, he's perpendicular. But before they got him up, I leaned over, he's flat on the ground, put my hand to his ear, and I think I used my helmet as an amplifier. I said, John, it's Doc. You're going to be all right. John, everybody loves you. I was way too identified. I cared too much. It's probably not uncommon. So I hoist him up. And once he's perpendicular but not off the ground, I said, all right, John, you're going to be okay. And I went, be good. You're all right. Right here, right where we got shot. And he screamed bloody fucking murder. Yow! And that set up the next train because he's on this end of the, he's on the northern part of the bomb crater. It's a 500-pound bomb crater. And he swings all the way across because he's getting lifted up. So it's like pitting the pendulum. He swings all the way back. But the more they lift them up, the smaller the arc of the pendulum, but that went on for it seemed like forever. And then they hauled him in. And then the chopper was gone. With all this dust and shit trickled and filtered back down. We gathered up our gear. And we're gone. I wrote to him. And he wrote back. It's in the film. He was engaged, he got married, and he walks with a cane.
How about his arm? It's okay?
I don't know. And that's how it ended.
So that was one of the worst wounds you had to deal with?
Yeah, tough. I mean, that I can remember. Yeah, I mean, I've looked at the MVA that I saw get killed. I mean, it was ugly. No,
we had better ordnance, we had better munitions.
Well, they came after us with hollow hits, and we killed some people and went through their stuff, and they had a box of hollow hits. I wasn't happy.
And that's meant to inflict as much
I'll fuck you
wound.
up. Come in like this and go out like that. I once looked into a guy's head because they brought a colonel wanted a trophy. So somebody killed somebody. The colonel wanted to see a dead guy. So by the time they dragged him in, because it was a head wound, the guy didn't have any brains left. His brains got spilled on the way in. They drag him, and you grab the heels and you just drag him. You turn around and just drag him in. And
this was Cambodia too?
this was Cambodia, LZ Braco. And it was the morning. And the colonel wasn't around yet. And this guy had like a hole the size of a walnut. And his brains were gone. So I looked in, it was all iridescent inside. It was pretty cool. And then some other stuff. I saw a guy get his head shot off.
So the body was there but no head?
Body was there, he was there, and then, yeah.
Oh, you saw him get a hit?
Yeah.
What was that? Describe that.
Steve was there. We set up an automatic ambush. 5 claymores, 5 or 10, I forget. Daisy chained. So they're rigged so they'd all go off at once.
So you're trying to get a good sized force.
Yeah, so you're talking, it's probably 30 yards long. And it didn't, and the trip line was in the center, so wherever they hit it, they were going to get it. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, they hit it. And we were 40 yards away. And
that's pretty close.
Okay. 5 claymores is a lot. That's a lot of C4. 1 claymore is roughly 12 sticks of dynamite. So there was this incredible loud, metallic bang. I can't describe it. And then right after that, people were howling, howling, howling. I've never heard it. I mean, they were beyond what the human body is meant to do. And it turned out it was the lead element of 500 people. And so it was probably 50 or 60 people, and they hit it. And they just screamed and screamed and screamed, and then they started to run. You could hear the stampede. And a friend of mine said they opened fire. I don't remember. They were probably trying to draw us out. Nobody returned fire. In the morning we reconned. And the Claymore's down here when it blows. And it spews out steel balls in a 180-degree arc. It's illegal. So these people that they didn't take away, they died. They were perforated. And so they just bled to death over the night. And we heard them dying. They just slowly bled to death. And it was really gruesome to hear that. And then when we found them, they just died where they were, and they were perforated. One guy was sitting on a tree stump with a timber saw wrapped around him, and he bled to death. And a woman, and then there's like 5 of them, they just lying one atop the other. They just collapsed and died. And we surrounded them, and one guy, Steve went up to one guy and said, "Chu Hai," and I thought the guy was raising up his AK to surrender. In 1999, Steve said no, he was raising up to shoot. And so Steve shot him from probably 10 yards. And then the platoon opened up. Steve told me he thought he didn't, and I was right there, safe, frankly. And Steve thought he was going to get hit by people behind him, but the machine gun team was beating on this guy. And when the smoke cleared, it was like the OK Corral. When the smoke cleared, literally clouds of smoke, all this cordite and all this shit. The guy's head was gone. And so he's up on his elbows, okay, but there's no head. And Steve was so close that the guy took he took skull fragments to his chin, and he wanted a Purple Heart for that, and I wouldn't give him a Purple Heart.
Did you take the fragments out of his?
I didn't find him. His tooth was chipped, and that's what I remember. I fixed up his tooth, and he said, "Doc, you're going to put me under a Purple Heart?" I said, "No."
Why not?
Yeah, and I said, "You didn't get shot," and I liked, but I said, "Lieutenant, with LT, you didn't get shot. It's skull fragments from the dead mink. You didn't get shot." It turns out that this guy's. There was a girl he got. She got hit by the claymores then, but she lived, and then she got hit again when everybody opened up. So I patched her up. She lived. She was the one that got interrogated and told whoever interrogated her that they were the lead element of whatever.
So there were women in the NVA.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I knew about the VC, but I didn't know about the NVA.
She was. It was rough. People are looking at it. For her, it's terrible. But yeah, and. She was dehydrated, so I come over and I start to pat. People are looking at me. What's he going to do? She's grabbing at my canteen, and we're all thinking these people aren't human beings. So I thought I give her my canteen. That's a quart of water. That's gone. That's where I was thinking. That's how I was thinking. But she glugged that down, and she lived. People just looked at me like I was strange.
Was she the only survivor from that attack?
Yeah. 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 She was covered with this guy's brains. And Steve was cool. He told me that, 25 or 30 years later, he told me that he actually went into the rear and his jaw got infected, so they had to perform surgery on him. But he never held it against me. He got the Purple Heart.
I understand that. That was really a problem if parts of someone else got in your body. That the infection could be quite serious.
He was, I think he low-keyed it, but he said, "Yeah, I got back to the rear and he saw the docs and they performed surgery." I missed it. I fucked up. It wasn't life-threatening at the time. I missed it.
Well, your job, was different than the guys back at the field hospitals.
Well,
I mean, wasn't it pretty you know, get them back, get them on a medevac, dust
Basic
off, get them, you know.
It was basic first aid. The training was piss poor, it was basic first aid. I was just... I was lucky, and the medics, the guys in the platoon liked me, so that told me that I was doing a good job. And then I found out years later, like 25 years later, when I ended up in a psych ward for PTSD, I didn't know to what extent medics were held in some regard. So if you're a good medic, medics were considered, you know, good people.
What did you observe in Vietnam that you admired? Do you want some water?
That's kind of what I wrote to you. I admired our point man, and I admired our head medic, and machine gunners, the door gunners, the chopper pilots. But there was one particular incident where we were waiting to get picked up after a couple of weeks or whatever in the jungle, and we're by a well-used trail, and 3 NVA came walking down, and this one guy named Biggin, that's how I remember, is Biggin. He and everybody got down and started shooting, and they were missing. It was just wildfire. And Biggin and the captain just stood up and very methodically picked this guy off, shot him. And I thought, that's cool. That's cool, that's brave. And also the captain, he just, he loved combat, and he was just, he inspired confidence, and we needed that because the guy before him wasn't so great. And he kept us alive. And Steve was good. He had that ability just to do what I'm telling you to do. You go, you do this, and you do this, do it. And he didn't take any unnecessary risks. And he was in control.
You said you admired a CO transfer from the 101st?
We had a guy on a LZ Compton. It was an LZ. The thing we come back to and guard for a week and then go out. And he was a transfer from the 101st. And they kicked him out of the 101st because he wouldn't use his weapon. So they sent him to the cab and they put him on his base. They wouldn't send him out on patrols. So they made him a shit burner. And he was into Cahill Gibran. And everybody hated him. Because he was the sort of, he fit the category of hippie. And he was a self-proclaimed conscientious objector. And whether he had it or not, I don't know, or I don't remember, whatever. But I instantly liked this guy. He was just, he was bright. He didn't follow the crowd. And he believed in himself. He was way ahead of me, he was willing to sacrifice for his commitments. And I don't remember taking too much flack, but it was like, why are you hanging with him? Because I like him.
And in terms of the things that bothered you while you were there, you referred to you say in the jungle we once walked past the fresh hulk of a Cobra gunship.
Yeah, that was something. It was like
so it got knocked down.
It was a Cobra that I must have got shot down. And I just remember the gears. The gears were like big toy blacks, shiny and almost shimmering in the jungle. It was photographer's light. The jungle is so iridescent. emerald green, the way the light filters down, you know, it's all vivid. And so here's all this metal, and it's still got the grease on it and stuff. And the thing wasn't rusty, so it was fresh. And, you know, the company just kind of saunters by, it's still alive. And there's this unspoken, unconscious awareness that this guy either parachuted out, or he died and they dragged him out, or he dragged himself out. But it was like we'd walk past a giant metallic beast that had just got shot. It was as if it was alive. It was like it was haunted, and it was a haunting experience. Nobody said anything. It was like it was an extension of us, because it was an American
machine. Yeah. And when I asked you about your memories of the Vietnamese, you talked about some of the local entrepreneurs, some of whom were spies. Do you have any specific, recollections of that?
We got.
You surmised they were spies, or they wound up coming back at night and getting caught?
Well, there was one guy that was a Kit Carson scout. He was an NVA captured, and then he was retrained to work with the Americans to walk.
What's a Kit Carson?
There was a program where the Americans would take certain prisoners, NVA, and train them, feed them, clothe them, pay them, and then basically these guys took an oath that they would work for us.
Yeah, I didn't know they were called Kit Carson. I knew about that program.
Yeah, that's it. So this guy was a little bit atypical. He was about 55.
Oh.
Yeah, most of them were younger, and we got hit on Compton sometime in February. I think it was February. And Steve was there. Took about 75 rounds, rockets and mortar rounds, and we figured out it was probably him calling in the rounds. And on the larger bases, a lot of the hooch girls and the people that worked in just doing the laundry and sweeping and cleaning and this and that, the vendors, people that sold things, people that sew, tailors. So we took some rocket attack in August of '70. I think it was August. I forget. No, it was July. And they called the rounds in perfect. I mean, just perfect. So it was somebody inside. The other side of the coin. So for the time that I was there, I just didn't see these people as human beings. I just didn't. Part of it was because we didn't work in villages. Most of the time it was just jungle. But in '98, I met a fellow named Bao Ninh, who was the author of a book called The Sorrow of War. I went back to Vietnam in '95, a lot of adventures in Southeast Asia over 6 months. Had a chance to meet him or try to find him and didn't do it. Wrote him a letter in '96, and then by incredible coincidence, because I knew his picture, I met him in UMass Boston. And he was a sapper, and he's still thin and wiry, and he's got the look. First time I saw his picture, I had a nightmare. And called out his name, came over, somebody translated, it was very, very emotional. And it was like a turning point. To shake hands, talk, to be embraced. By the enemy. That was a turning point.
So the turning point came almost 30 years after the war. You continued to think of them as dinks and the other.
Always.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think? What do you think about all that? I mean, how does that? Isn't that the way you get people to shoot other people, to dehumanize them?
Right. And it's I mean, I met this guy and we had this experience, but it's outlapsed back into the language. Call them dinks, whatever. But at the same time, it's the way he looked at me. We spoke for 3 hours. At one point I said, is there anything else you want to say? Did I miss something? He said, yeah. Tell your friends that we were not robots. Tell your friends we were human beings. And we also went out, a bunch of us, with other NVA one night in Boston. So it's like 6 Americans and 6 NVA, all vets, drinking. And pretty friendly, pretty cool. Pulled it off. So I think there were layers of communication going on. And somewhere in the collective communal conscious of all of us was 25, 30 years ago, I'd kill you, you'd kill me, because that's the way it worked. Here we are, and we're having a civil conversation, and we're being polite, and there's a part of us that are acting as, for lack of a better word, civil human beings that have attempted to transcend our differences. And we're doing that. But it's all mixed up. There's part of us that have gotten past it, and there's part of us that never will. And it's okay.
The Boom Boom Girls?
Boom Boom Girls, Boom Boom is GI slang for
Prostitution.
prostitution.
Yeah, sure.
So every once in a while, they're on the basis, that's where they were. But there were a couple of times in some areas that weren't so, that were relatively safe. They just follow us out of the villages. Once or twice we were by a village, and then girls would just follow us. And this one guy, he was like 6'2", his name was Buddha, he was a cop from Detroit. And he was shacking up with this girl who was like 4'2". And then, he'd just wander off in the bush, and he'd have this fun, and he'd come back. And then we came into another village a week later, and these girls came by with motorcycles. And guys just threw off their packs, and they went into the bushes. And one of them was that French Vietnamese. She was gorgeous. She was the equivalent of an Amerasian. She was I don't know what that, she was French, she was just gorgeous. And life is cheaper over there. Prostitution was a way of making money. They came by, they had it down to a science.
This was business.
Yeah, they had condoms, they had soda, they had their bodies for sale, they had candy, and it was all packed on the backs of their motorcycles. And when we headed out, they headed out.
Did you ever partake of such pleasures?
Yes, yes. The hilarity of it was back in the rear. I was a virgin when I went over. So they had this one girl and all the medics. She was for the medics. And everybody was waited in line to take their turn. And it's like 20 minutes or whatever, next.
What was the cost?
A couple of bucks. Rough guess, a couple of bucks.
So this is on the base, or you have to get off the base?
No, on the base. It's right in the medics' battalion aid station. Now it's my turn, and I'm a virgin. I don't know where it is. I don't know if it goes this way or this way. I don't know what to look for. I don't know what to do. Just from an architectural point of view, I don't know what goes where, and do I? And so, for 2 hours, roughly, I'm with this girl in this bunk, and just trying to be a gentleman. And at one point, this is the truth, she said to me in a perfect, this is a deliberate oxymoron, she said to me in perfect broken English, "G.I., you queer?" Because I didn't know what to, it's like, can I feel her up? And can I, and nothing ever happened. 2 hours later, I walk out, and there are these guys with beat faces and bald fists. what the fuck were you doing in there, man? What took you so fucking? It's like, "Look, sorry, that's really. I go to Japan a couple of months later. Still a virgin. Still don't know. Give me a map of the human body, I wouldn't be able to find where Mr. Wiggly meets Mrs. Wiggly. I'm a prostitute, Yokohama. Get upstairs, the wig comes on. She's still pretty good looking. And we lie on the bed, and her hands go where they're supposed to go, and then I start to just respond, and then she periodically said, "We talk business?" And I'm thinking, I don't understand. And then that happened like 3 times, and she goes, 30,000 yen. And I said, "Oh, okay already, here." And then it was time. And we're naked. And I said to her, "Look, I'm a little bit nervous because I was in the jungle and I made some excuses." I said, "So maybe you can just kind of be patient and help me." And she did. And it was awful. She was into this mechanical, turning her hips, rotating her hips. It was just a job.
Yeah.
And it was really awful. Just awful. So that was my rite of passage.
So a lot happened for you in the war.
I lost my virginity and I learned how to shoot a gun.
So to speak. Okay. Okay. Did you sustain any injuries or other long-lasting problems? When you talk about post-traumatic stress.
We got into a situation where the first grenade blew up the machine gun and the second grenade landed amongst everybody, and there was nowhere for anybody to run. I was over here, they all threw themselves on top of me, and the grenade blew up. Luckily it was a Chicon, so that meant it's a lot of shrapnel, but not a lot of force, and even the shrapnel wasn't life-threatening. So they took the blast, and I got a couple little slivers I didn't even realize till the next day. I never said anything. I bandaged up the guys, so I never got hit. Some guy almost shot my head off with a shotgun. Point man fucked up.
What happened?
He sat down, taking a break on a patrol, and the shotgun went off, and it hit like up here.
What does he have a shotgun in the middle of the...
It was walking point. Some guy, he carried a shotgun, and one of our medics carried a grease gun. And whatever you could get your hands on.
Where did stuff like that wind up in the military?
Stuff that was, I mean, it's war. People, there were shotguns. Some guys got shotguns. Some guy gave me a 45. It's a long story, I won't go in. He just gave it to me on a rear base. "What do you do, son?" "I'm a medic." "You're a medic." "I don't think medics carry weapons." "So I carry da-da-da." "Would you like a 45? "Sure." This guy just pulls out a chrome-plated 45 in an airport and gives it to me. Fine. So I was lucky. Came down with malaria. So in combat-wise, no Purple Heart. I came back and had problems adjusting. VA initially gave me 10% for PTSD, then 30%, then 50%, then 70%, then they dropped it back to 50%. And all I'm looking at is, okay, that's a percentage. And percentage equals money. I don't have any problems. Really just, it's your perfect archetypical expression of denial. I don't have a problem. Yeah. But I did. So went back to Vietnam in Asia in '95, and all kinds of flashbacks, and rage, and anger, and even though I'd seen doctors in the past for anxiety and this and that. They didn't know what it was. But once in Vietnam, I've been to I've been to Laos and Thailand. But once I hit Vietnam and started traveling in there, I still didn't make a connection. But then I had a hallucination in Sumatra of myself in combat. And still kept traveling, and then melted down in Europe. And I could walk out that door and I wouldn't know how to get back in this room. That's how bad it was. I was staying in some pension. I'd walk out the room and I wouldn't know where I was. So somehow I got back home. Friends said I should see somebody. I said, what for? I gotta find a job. They said, no, you have a problem. Then I spent 7 weeks in a psych ward for PTSD. And
was it the talking cure? What did they do for 7
there was
weeks?
a talking cure. It was the VA. It turns out that in '76, that was the first time I left the country. I worked in a kibbutz. A girl I was seeing was Swiss. She ended up, well, when she went back to Switzerland, I followed her and I had a breakdown on the way over and ended up in one of the best clinics in the world, called Clinic on Zurichberg, in Zurichberg, Switzerland. And I stayed there for 2 months and received Jungian therapy. It was really quite good. But they didn't even know what was going on. It was '77 and PTSD wasn't in the literature yet. So the VA eventually paid for that. It's like $2,500. In those days, it was a lot of money. But it wasn't until '96 that I started addressing it as a problem. And the talking cure at the VA was at the opposite level of what the quality of treatment I got in Switzerland. It was kind of like basic training. The people who referred me meant well, but and it got the ball rolling. I'll say that much.
Did you have a variety of jobs after the war?
I had a variety of jobs and basically got fired or quit. Everyone. And
What kind of, anything in particular?
I started out with a doorman job, which I've written about. It's a good story. And carried a load of 25. Slept with it, carried it. Quit that job. Quit college for the second time. Went back to school. After 5 years of pulling this really bad job working with disabled vets, 4 disabled vets, state job. It's really, it's just hard. And then got a BA. Just went to school and partied.
What school did you go to?
See, no, smoked dope, fucked a lot of girls. I fell in love with one girl, and then the rest was just. I had no feelings for women other than lust. I had a lot of male friends, but women were for fucking. I'd say, you know, it's nice knowing them. And then they start crying. It's like, what are you crying about? And then I had 2 sets of friends in college, intellectuals, and they weren't just outcasts, they were psychopaths. I was hanging out with some very seriously crazy people. Seriously crazy. Always trying to get into nice, something violent. Fun times.
This is in the 70s?
Most of them became cops. Eventually went to social work school. One of the better ironies in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Only worked well with crime victims, and the rest was bullshit. And last job was in New Zealand.
Yeah. I was asking you in the questionnaire, well, 2 things. One, Well, let me go back a little bit because I do want to touch on one thing you said when you talked, related to what you were talking about when you came home. You said most VA doctors were dismissive or hostile, and they gave pills, and that was about it. But you finally met a good doctor, and that helped you. But it says, I kept a meat cleaver or machete near the bed until 2001. So you stopped doing that?
Yes.
That sounds like a good plan. And then, do you still think about your war experiences?
Every day. Every day.
And why do you think that's so? Just the intensity of what you experienced for that year?
I think it's what I told my therapist when I got out of the psych ward. I said, look, I had problems before I went over, and I think the war just ramped them up. And it turns out that's true. I think that's generally true. I mean, there were guys that were relatively intact and they got screwed up. But I had problems before I went over, and it just made things worse. The war, in a good sense, it's the closest I ever got to people. One of the closest times I got really close to people. I was needed.
And so most of your friends now are veterans? Do you think that's generally true?
It's mixed. Most of the people I know are veterans, but I've got one or two friends, really good friends, people that I like, that they're just not veterans. They're just not. And it's nice. But it's a good point. I mean, some of the veterans that are my friends from the Joiner Center, Larry Hyman, I really like him. He's put the war behind him, but it's still in him. It inhabits him. But he's in a good place. And some guys that I've met recently, they're in a good place, but it's still there. So we're friends, we're becoming friends, and it's not so much about the war as it might have been 10 years ago. But the war's there. Now we can talk about other stuff.
But it's the bond.
Well, it's a bond, or it's just, there's a common awareness. Just a common awareness. I know you'll put up with something if I do something crazy or nutty or don't respond in a normal manner. I know you'll understand. It's neutral.
Anything else you want to add to the tape? Any other experiences that we didn't cover? Or points you want to spell out further?
I think America is Americans have a lot to learn when it comes to what it means to be in war. They're fairly insulated. And they're suffering the consequences of their insularity. And I think they'll be in for a surprise when guys and the gals from Iraq start to speak up.
So you're involved with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
I'm a member of them, and I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and I've been a member of other groups along the way. What's the deal? I think the deal is that I identify with the underdog, the people that have been, people that have been shot up, the people that have been on the shit end of the American stick. I'm drawn to that. The first way of getting involved was with people who were caught up in the Central American wars. Because I didn't want to get involved with veterans groups because I don't have a problem with Vietnam. And slowly I was like, okay, that's the issue.
You said that Americans don't, what did you say exactly? realize how insular they are. You know, we have been involved in a number of hot and cold wars over the last 50, since World War II.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And some terrible things have been done in the name of freedom and democracy and all of that stuff, as you say in Central America and other places. I mean, what is it? You know, why do we countenance that stuff as a civilization, you think, as a society?
This country has never been at war. This country has never been invaded. This country, Howard Zinn, it's a great point of departure. Read Howard Zinn's work. It's not ideological. Here are the facts. Here's the real history of the United States from the 16th century. What is this country predicated on? Genocide and slavery. There were also good people in terms of the labor wars, people standing up for their rights. What did we do to African Americans? What did we do to the Native Americans? What did we do to people who stood up and said, capitalism is basically making the wealthy an elite class at the expense of everyone else. We have a two-tier society. All these, World War I, rah, 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 over there, all this stuff. No concept of what was really going on. Robert Graves said it best in goodbye to all that. When he went on leave, he's English, but the same thing applies. He went on leave after he'd seen all these people. He was an officer in World War I. This is the guy that wrote I, Claudius.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of his writing.
Yeah. So he goes back to England on leave after he's seen all this carnage, and makes reference to the little mother, which was an editorial or a letter to the editor that was widely disseminated. This woman had lost her son. There was all this patriotic and nationalistic prose that she wrote. Peon, and we're fighting a good fight, and the Hun, and duty, honor, country, England, and all this stuff. And people loved this. They ate it up. And they'd see him in the street, they'd walk over to him, they'd slap on the back. Jolly good, and just talking it up. Telling him things in such a way as if they knew more about war than he did. And he was gracious enough in the book to say that they were speaking in a language that he didn't understand. I think that was brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing can be applied to Americans now. Just don't know.
I just have about 10 more minutes of tape, and I wanted to ask you, there were two things I want to get to. One was, I noticed that you were very well decorated for your service. You have a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars. That's pretty, you don't get those for nothing. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that. And then finally, in terms of being Jewish in the field, did that ever present a problem, or did it affect your own sense of religion?
I wasn't brought up, well, I rebelled against religion, so it just wasn't
On your dog tags, did you have the Star of David?
no preference. It was always verbal, it was, always written, so it's either whatever the denomination was, and if there was none, it was just no preference. In terms of the medals,
The guys knew you were Jewish, and I was wondering if there was any anti-Semitism or anything. So once you were in the field, you didn't feel any
no,
sense of...
I'm writing, I've got a story in the works, and what I saw was more racism than there was anti-Semitism.
And was that true when you got in the bush, or was that back in the bases?
Everywhere.
Because I've heard all kinds of different things from different people.
Every year was different, but what I saw was in the bush and in the rear, big time. Serious racism. Serious racism. As far as the medals, yeah, I like the backstory to the Silver Star, which is I wouldn't give Steve the Purple Heart, and he didn't hold it against me.
Did he put in for your commendation for the Silver Star?
Yes.
What was the, do you describe those events already in the tape?
I described them in a story that I'll send you.
Okay.
A little easier. It's a good story. It's coming out in a national journal.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Was it something in Cambodia?
It's in Tainan. And what I learned later was that Steve was right behind me, and he witnessed whatever it was I did, and never said anything, ever. And so when I met him up in '99, I said, what was that all about? How come you never said anything? And he was pretty cool. He just said, there's nothing to say. And it was in '99 when I asked him about his job. I was telling him about the Purple Heart stuff. And he said, yeah, Doc, I had to go in and I said, we were sitting close to each other, and I leaned over and I said, are Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, I'm sorry, are you okay?
Tell me this just in a nutshell. Obviously, you can send me the story since it's being published. Just briefly, what were the events surrounding that?
I'm sleeping outside because it's hot, and some guy comes running past. We're getting hit. I run to a bunker. I'm in a bunker with a squad leader from another squad. The rounds go right over us. I hit the bunker 30 meters or 50 meters away. They all clear siren. We don't know it, but that's what happened. We heard the all clear siren, we run out, people are screaming medic. I run to that bunker, it's on, and there's a guy named Gene Locklear inside, and there was no blast wall. So some mortar hit here, and there should have been a sandbag wall here. That would have taken the blast, but it wasn't there. So he's inside, big guy, about 6'2", and he's like this. And so he's got shrap in the head and shrap in the hand to block them. He's a reflex.
Was he conscious?
He was in shock. And there's a case, the bunker's on fire, probably from the blast. So the sandbags are on fire. And there's a case of frags on top of the sandbag, on top of the bunker. A case of army frags, and they weren't pineapple grenades, they were baseball grenades. And
what's a baseball grenade?
Baseball grenade it doesn't look like a pineapple. It's smooth.
Okay.
Got a killing radius of about 5 yards, and it's nasty. And so there's about, I don't know, let's say there's a dozen of them in a box. Now, if that thing exploded, everybody would have got fucked up. And you just block the stuff out. So they went in and I said, Gene, you got to get out, come on. And he's in shock. And I said, Gene, there's a case of frags on top. Get out. This thing's going to blow. And he can't hear me. So I crawl in. And it's the classic pose. Drag him out, arm over the shoulder. The guy's bigger than I am. And drag him to the aid station. And that's where the doctor's drunk. I said, and then they drag in one of my other friends. Another two guys dragging one of my friends. And the doctor finally starts working on Gene, or somebody did. I see my other friend, my best friend, and a good friend. He's hit bad, ghost wipe, calls my name, I call his, and then he just collapsed. And I started crying. And there's a couple more casualties, so I ran out. And then I started shaking. And then the other medics saw me. And I started shaking and I couldn't bandage up this guy. And I said, can you help me? I gotta bandage up this guy. And then 2 or 3 months later, they have this ceremony. Someone says, hey, you gotta get ready. They're having this ceremony for you. And I said, what for? Don't you know? No, I don't know. But they have the ceremony, and it's a couple of awards, and it's everybody's got to be in formation, and they've got banners and bugles and pillows and colonels and all this bullshit. And afterwards, this other medic who helped me bandage this other guy up, he cursed me out. He said, what the fuck did you do to get the Silver Star? What the fuck did you do? And I lived with that for a long time. And yeah, up until I met Steve. And
Is all that written down in the citation? You know,
oh, I found the original citation.
mm-hmm.
I went to the National Archives about 3 years ago.
Had you lost that?
No, I got it. I don't know, but originally I got the battalion report history, then I went to the National Archives, and long story short, we went into the stacks. This guy pulls out a box. He says, "Oh, look at," and I said, "Yeah, Levy," and there's a folder starts with Levy, and stuff gets lost over the years, but this guy knows his stuff. He's retired now, and he goes, "I think this belongs to you." And there it is. It's the original orders, signed by Steve, signed by Captain Heisler. And I was like, I said, "Can we make a copy of this?" He said, "Yeah." Cool. And I found some other guy, this guy that was on that base that could overrun. I sent that to him. So when I saw Steve, it was like, that's cool. Because I still don't think of it as I don't deserve that.
I'm sure you did. Pulled that guy out. He would have been dead, but those things would have blown up.
And the main thing is that it's in the story in a different way. I did it without thinking, which is the way most people act. Yeah. And I trust Steve's judgment. So, and also it's 35 years ago. And Paul Bucco won the Medal of Honor in '68. And he's pretty cool. He always says, or he once said, "I did this for my men. All the men that aren't here, my men, thank you." He's talking to a convention for Vietnam Veterans of America. And another guy that I know who works with vets has said, Medal of Honor winners, DFC, whatever, the more prestigious the award, the more modest the recipient. When you get these guys that are